Welcome back to our fourth episode in our differentiation series. So far, we have covered some quick start tips just to get you going. And we've also had 2 episodes, one specifically about serving your higher achieving students, and then last week's episode about serving your lower achieving students. And these tend to be grouped into different class periods. So that's kind of what we addressed in those past couple of weeks here. Now, I'm sure, though, many of you listening over these last few weeks, though, were screaming at your headphones like, but what about the one class period I have? Let's say the on grade level chemistry 1 course I teach that has a wide range of learners all in the same room, that has 30 different students with such a range in abilities. There's not really like one average that I feel like I can speak to because everyone feels like an outlier. How do you balance differentiating what you're doing to meet every single one of those students where they are? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't make it obvious the very different levels that your students may be on? This could be in an on grade level course. This could be in an honors course. You and I both know the variety of students you can see just in an honors course alone. Okay, so that's what we're going to dive into today in this episode. The way I'm going to kind of approach this is I have a few prefaces because I feel like differentiation is such a broad topic. Like, even though I'm doing 5 episodes on it, I'm like, it's not even enough. So I have a few prefaces so that we're all kind of coming to this from a common perspective, because I know all your classrooms, just like every student in one class period can be so different. All of the classrooms of the teachers listening to this are so different. So I'm going to try to get us on some common ground. Then I'm going to walk through this by talking about each type of instructional resource that you might use in your class. Direct instruction, reinforcing practice, activities, labs, projects, tests, and how I would differentiate those variables so that I'm reaching all these different levels with my test and all these different levels with the direct instruction I'm doing. Okay, so that's kind of how we're going to approach this. And then I have a few listener submitted questions that I'm going to sneak the answers to into this episode. So without further ado, let's get to it. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. First things first, I think a lot of this conversation, which is why I want to start with this preface, depends on if the students in your class, with all their varying abilities, are they receiving different credit or are they taking the same class? Okay, let me explain that. So some of you might be teaching a general biology class of 30 students, and there's a wide range of student abilities in that general biology class, your second period class, let's say. But all of them are getting credit for taking general biology, 101. Okay. How we are going to differentiate for that group of students is much different from if we're talking about a class period. Maybe it's your second period, where some of the students in your second period class that you see from 9 to 9:50 every day, some of them are getting general biology credit and some are getting advanced or honors biology credit. If your students are getting different levels of credit and they're in the same class period, that is your weapon. I shouldn't say weapon. That is your shield, if you will, for those honors or advanced students that are going to give you so much pushback for you giving them more and pushing them harder and having higher expectations of them. You can straight up say, if you don't want honors credit for this class, then you don't have to do the honors work. But if you want this credit, you have to do this. That was one of the big kind of complaints I was seeing a lot in my DMs and my email inbox when I brought up this topic of differentiation, is so many of you saying like, it's so hard to motivate those higher achieving students to do the extra, that kind of thing. Well, let me first say, like, if they're getting credit for extra, that's the motivation. Like, sis, if you're not going to do the work, then we're going to bump you down to general bio because you're not doing the extra. So I want to address that. Most of my tips, though, in this podcast could apply to that group of you, but I'm really going to try to speak more towards those of you who just they're all getting honors credit or they're all getting general biology credit, but they're so different in this class in terms of ability. How do I reach them all? Keep the high achievers from being bored, the low achievers from getting discouraged, and everyone from knowing where everyone else is at. Okay, so that's my first preface. Second preface I need to say before we dive into the specific tips is this is so culture dependent. The way that your students are going to respond to you either giving them more support or not giving them more support or having higher expectations or maybe having lower expectations. Like the culture that you create in your classroom is going to totally impact this. And culture is not something that we can change overnight. I have an entire virtual PD course on culture I can link if you want more advice for how to create the classroom culture that you really want. But, knowing that this is coming out in February, like we're mid-year here, it might be really hard for you to have a culture shift to make it so students understand I have different expectations for different people in this class. And so you may need to have like a State of the Union address, or as we say in the South, a come to Jesus moment with your students where you kind of gather them around on a Monday and just say, hey, I'm just going to be straight up honest here. We have a lot of varying levels in this course, in this class period. I want to serve each of you as best I can and meet you where you are. And I can only do that if, and then you set kind of some parameters, or you say, I can only do that if we just acknowledge that some of you are going to be expected to work more independently. Some of you are going to be expected to help our classroom in this way. Others of you, I'm going to be giving a little bit more one-on-one time to. Setting that straight, I think, is really a gift to your culture and to your students, and to be really honest about like, hey, when we're in this class period, we're all working together. Like if you finish early, then you're coming to me and we're going to find something else for you to do to serve our class. And if you're feeling behind, that's nothing to be ashamed of. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. I'm going to do my best to help you feel caught up. So having that kind of conversation, I think from the front is very impactful. Now, let's get really, really practical and really actionable about how to actually do this by walking through each of your instructional resources and how I would differentiate them to make sure I'm like reaching all these different levels as best I can. Because remember, a mantra here, I want you to do the best that you can within your current capacity, within the current season of life that you're in. And that's going to constantly be changing. Some seasons you're going to have more capacity, others you're going to have less. Right now, I feel very low capacity. I don't know if you can hear in this audio if my voice sounds different, but I've had the flu for literally 2 weeks. It has lingered and lingered and lingered. And I'm like, will my body ever be normal again? So I have a more limited capacity than normal. Hopefully this should be a very short season for me because you can't have the flu forever. My body should eventually fight this off. But, just give yourself some grace here. We're going to do the best we can. Okay. Now, one little plug I think that might be helpful for you that I found so helpful for me just from a curriculum organization perspective when serving a lot of different students with a lot of different needs at a lot of different levels and not having the students necessarily know is using a packet. I've talked about packets before. I love them so much. Other teachers use workbooks. Yes, they are my life's work. Like they take so much time to create. I don't expect like everyone to be making these from scratch. This could be like a long-term goal for you if you want to create your own packets. But I love a packet because what I do, and I have a whole podcast episode on this, I'll link in the show notes if you want to hear more about packets. But at the start of each unit, on the first day of the unit, I give each student a packet that has all of their handouts for the entire unit in one place. The cover page has all of the objectives and the vocabulary that we're going to be meeting. It's basically their study guide for the end of unit test. So they have that from day one. Then the packet has every practice handout, every lab, every, activity, every project rubric. I used Cornell Note outlines, which we'll talk about in a second. It's all in there. And the reason that I love this is because you can print different packets for different students. And as you're printing them, you can put shapes in the corner to mark like which students are getting, a heart packet versus star packet versus smiley face, whatever. Or you can just write their names on them and say, these students are getting these students are getting these. And all they know is like when you're passing out, like this is my packet. They don't necessarily sit next to someone and compare page to page, okay? And the majority of it is the same. But I'm going to talk through, as we're going through these different instructional resources today, how some of the pages might be different and how this is a really great way to kind of package it where no one's really knowing who's getting what. Okay, so first, let's talk about direct instruction. So if you're using lecture, if you're doing any notes at all, if I have mixed levels, regardless of if they're known to be CP and honors in one class or they're just a variety of students, I give one lecture from up front. I speak to the most important basic information from up front in terms of like what we're going to be like writing down on our pages. Okay, I'm trying to cover the bare minimum here to reach the largest average student population I can in the classroom. But what the students have in front of them while we're taking notes can be entirely different levels. So if you have It's Not Rocket Science resources, you get a Cornell note outline, which you get a basic version, which is just truly like headings and the margin and, the summary section, but you just kind of get headings and maybe some diagrams in there. That's going to be, for your most high achieving student, if you will. Then you get a fill in the blank version. And then you also get a completely typed in version where students can just be highlighting and marking up. There's also a CP version, and then there's the honors version if you do have the ability to give separate lectures to like different students at different times. The honors do go into deeper detail. There's also a printable version that's a PDF because I love paper and I'm not ashamed to say that. And then there's also the digital version that's on Google for students that are better served by typing. Okay, so there's so many different options for what students could have in front of them. And I love that because we can all be talking about the same thing, but what you're looking at on your paper can be customized to fit what you need for your needs. If like you can't write as fast, you just get to listen, or maybe you're just going to highlight, or maybe you're just going to doodle in the margins of the Cornell notes because you have the filled in version. Whereas your more advanced students, your higher achievers, are going to be expected to write more. And if they're going to complain about this, if their next door neighbor has the fill in the blank version, okay, you can tell them and pull them off to the side. Like, I'm doing this to push you and stretch you and prepare you for other classes where you're going to be doing this more independently. You can have those conversations in private. Again, so much of this is culture and it's going to be relationship based. And you're going to have these conversations with students on their own. But the other reason I love this too is because it helps even the timing of lecture notes with the students who take longer to write having more support, the students that are faster writers having less support in their note taking. Also, a way you can differentiate the lecture while you're doing it without pushing some people too hard versus others is like what's on the slides and what they're expected to write is going to be like the base expectations here. But then I'm constantly encouraging deeper discussion. I'm encouraging those more advanced students, like ask me these questions. Let's get a little off topic here while people are writing. Like you're going to be differentiating in the conversation part of this, not necessarily the written part. So that's how I, diversify my notes and differentiate them. Now let's talk practice problems. With practice problems, I give all students the same practice problems. But what I will do is I will tell students, okay, I'm sending you off to work on this practice page on your own. Everyone just do the odds. Then if you finish, let me know. I'll come over and kind of peek at it, give it a gander. And then typically I'll say, okay, now work on the evens for those fast finishers. For the lower level students who might just be doing literally just the odds, then you're like, well, what's with the evens? Those I then save and I'll be like, hey, if you want to do more practice with me on this, come to tutoring and I'll do all these evens with you. And now we already have built-in practice problems for extra that we can do together. Another thing you can do too, which I did with my physical science curriculum, is I would label the last few questions as challenge questions. And so then my lower level students know like, hey, if you get to these and you want to try a challenge problem, go for it. But my fast finishers or my honor students, you're expected to go through every problem, including the ones that are labeled challenge. I typically like to always do more math, more quantitative stuff in honors classes versus on grade level. But if they're all in the same class period, I want to expose everyone to some math because I do think that's really valuable. I think science gives math meaning in such a beautiful way. I think so many students hate math because it's so abstract. But in science, we give math meaning. All the numbers matter. So I really like to expose them. But again, I'm not going to be making on grade level students rearrange acceleration equation to find final velocity like I would for an advanced or honor student. So I just simply use that word challenge. And then the high achieving students or the specific honor students in this mixed level class know like I have to do all those problems. And then the other students do not. Another thing, which I did specifically in my chemistry curriculum, and I'm actually going to be doing this when I revamp my physical science curriculum. I'm currently working on a revamp of it. If you already own it, you'll get all updates for life for free. That's an It's Not Rocket Science promise that I've always made. But in chemistry, I love this. So what I did is like, let's say there's 8 problems. Every subsequent problem is basically the same problem, but just with different numbers. Okay, so like that acceleration example, that's not in chemistry, but we're just going to keep going with it. Like if question number 1 has them just solving for acceleration, then question number 2 also just has them solving for acceleration. If question number 3 has them rearranging that equation to find final velocity, question number 4 also has them rearranging an equation to find final velocity. So what I specifically did when I wrote the questions was I gave you basically 2 of each type so that then you can do this so easily. You can say to your students that need more time or that need double time, they have a written accommodation for double time. There's only 24 hours a day, so you can't give them 48 hours a day. Instead of giving them double time, you can give them half the work in the same amount of time. You can say to them, hey, you only have to do the odds. Those evens are going to be the exact same. And again, save those evens for tutoring because you know they're going to be like similar versions of the same problem. So I hope that is a helpful idea for you. Now, one question that someone asked too in my DMs was like, I just feel like the overachievers, they get bored, they finish so fast. So this is one solution is they're going to have more problems to work through. So hopefully that helps even the playing field. Now, some will still finish. I have conversations with those students individually outside of class. Again, this is a culture and relationship thing that I'm creating with my students. And I say, I want you to help me help your peers while you're in this class. And you can even motivate them. I will let you put it on your resume. I will sign off that you've done like some volunteer hours at the end of the semester or whatever to help me with this if you're committed to doing this. First, I check to make sure they actually did it right and aren't just like not showing their work and writing the answers down. And I have no idea if they actually understand it. And then I send them off to help me help others. And you know which students in your class are going to be really uncomfortable being helped by another student versus being helped by you. And so you can be strategic. Like you're not going to send them to the student that's going to be really ashamed to be helped by a peer. You'll send them to other students. And we created a culture of this in my classroom. We called it phone a friend, from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So that when people needed to phone a friend for help on a problem, they literally could because their friends were the fast finishers. And that's how I engage those students that do finish fast and they do get bored and they want to do something. That is one way to kind of bring them in and help in your classroom when you're doing things like practice problems where some students just need more time to work through all of that. Now, I want to pause here before we talk about, labs and activities and all of that and differentiating those to address a really specific, like kind of case study someone submitted to me, because I think a lot of you have probably experienced something like this. So this teacher said, my higher needs students typically get a shorter assignment and focus on the basics only. My higher achieving students get pushed to do more. Unfortunately, my higher achieving students don't think that they should have to do the extensions because not everyone is required to do them. Why do I need to do more work? And my higher needs students will feel embarrassed at their accommodations or try to mask that they need help. This leads to either shutting down or distracting others. So any ideas for getting the message across that not everyone will get the same assignment and that is on purpose? Okay, so this is a culture issue, this kind of attitude, and it's not necessarily your fault. Like I'm not like trying to be like, you should have had a better culture. This is like a big macro level culture issue in our society. I think it's a post-pandemic problem, the lack of work ethic, the entitlement, all of these things. But we have to work on our microculture in our classrooms to combat this aggressively. But I think combating this aggressively starts with relationships on an individual level with those students. And so I think this looks like pulling them aside again, after class, before class, during lunch, whatever, and saying, here's the thing. While you are in this class period, you are mine. This is my 50 minutes with you. This is one reason why I don't assign homework. I'll link that podcast episode as well. I'll have a whole episode about why. Is because I like to really own the time that they're with me, and my bartering here, my motivation for them is I will not take any of your time outside of this class if you give me every second that you're in my class. Okay, that's how we're going to work together on this. And you say, so while you're in here, you're mine. If you finish early, you're part of our class ecosystem. If you don't want to help a friend, if you don't want to phone a friend and help tutor, you can be cleaning labware. Okay, you can be stapling something for me. You can be sorting something in the filing cabinet. Like you are not going to sit here and distract your classmates and just use up our oxygen. If you'd rather work on an extra project, which I'll talk about at the end, you can do that on your own, but you will not just sit here and be distracting. Also with the higher needs students, having conversations with them too. Like I'm not going to make a big deal about lower expectations for you, but that's where I'm saying everyone's getting the same sheet of 10 problems. And I'm saying to everyone, start with the first 5 or start with the odds and then reach out to me, check in with me, and then we'll talk from there. I'm here to help you. Like that's where I think it does help, not necessarily giving them their own entire practice packets that are like totally different. Like we're all getting all the problems. You may only be expected to do half of them. And again, I'm going to have that conversation up front, like, and say that to everyone, but then I'll go up to those high achievers and say, you're doing them all, you're expected to do them all, that kind of thing. Also though, you can have the conversations privately too with those higher needs students and say, hey, you just work on these first 3 and then give me a little wave, give me a little signal, and I'm going to come check in on you. I think if you just keep it private, keep it low key, you're here to serve these students. And I think when they start to see that, it really helps with some of the shame and things like that too. Again, also when they see it, like this is our class and we're working together, I think that really matters. Okay, I got to get going, or this is going to be like an hour-long podcast episode. All right, let's talk activities. I think one of the simplest ways you can differentiate activities is to use stations. I love stations. I try to include a set of stations in almost every unit that I write. Sometimes these are explorative, like lab stations where I've taken demos that I used to do up front and I've made them inquiry activities that students do on their own. Sometimes these are extension things where I have students looking up and researching things that we didn't get to talk about in class and answering questions. Sometimes these are discovery stations where I'm having them read some things so I don't have to do direct instruction on it. And then we circle back. Like there's so many different ways I use stations. I did a whole blog series on it once that I'll link in the show notes you can check out too. But I love using stations because they're so easy to differentiate. No matter what the kind of station is, you can go up to individual students that have higher needs and say, hey, the most important stations are numbers 1, 2, and 4. So you start with those. Everyone may have 6, but I just want you to start with these 3. And then when you finish those 3, let me know and I'll tell you which one to go to next. One reason I love to do this too is I always check stations for completion and then we just go over them as a class. And I love that because when you're grading for completion, you can have students complete different levels and still get full credit. So like your highest achieving students, you're expected to complete all 6 stations. So you will get a 10 out of 10 if all 6 are done, versus my student with an accommodation for double time, you're only going to be expected to do 3 of the stations. If you get 3 of the stations done, you will get your 10 out of 10. It makes it easier for grading in a way that feels differentiated for where their levels are. The other thing that's awesome too about stations, especially if you have discovery stations like I do in my anatomy curriculum and in chemistry that are really reading based, is you can use AI. You can use AI, take a picture of these things or plug them in and have AI write the stations for you at different levels. Or take a website, an article you want them to read, plug it into AI and say, hey, can you put this on, these 3 different reading levels? Then you just pass them out. Students don't know who has what. And then they're reading something that's much more appropriate for them, which is so awesome. I'll link my interview I did with Elise of Keystone Science about AI. She had so many amazing recommendations. And also Mitchell, I'll link that one too. I had 2 AI episodes. I'll link both of those in the show notes so you can check those out. Now, not every activity can be a stations activity, obviously, and that gets boring. Like you don't want all your activities to be stations. But I think activities are a beautiful way to kind of level the playing field for all students. We can kind of all stack hands. And especially if you're doing an activity in a partnership or a group, that helps students work together naturally. Like not every activity has to be like completely differentiated for all these different students. We can kind of all do the same thing sometimes. And then things like this that are heavier workload like stations, you can divide up who does what. Now, similarly, let's talk about labs, because you can't really like support every level of student with every single lab. Because let's be real, I mentioned before, my honors classes, I like to do more inquiry. I like to have them designing more. I like to ask harder questions. I like to really not give them a lot of instruction and just send them out on their own. Whereas with my lower level students, I do a lot more support, a lot more hand holding, a lot more guided inquiry, if you will. And so if your levels are really mixed all in the same class period, it's hard to navigate that. You can't just send half the students off to work on their own and then the other half you're there helping them with every step of it. Like you don't want it to be that obvious, like we said, that like who's doing what. Okay. So instead, I differentiate the labs on a lab by lab basis. So some labs we will do in a mixed level class will be more cookie cutter. And those are going to be a lot easier for your fast finishers, but that's fine because there's still so much they can get out of the lab. And then some labs are going to be harder. They're going to be more inquiry. They're going to be more open-ended. We're going to design them together. And in those, I am going to provide a lot more support and scaffolding that the higher achieving students won't need as much of, but that's okay. We're just going to do the best here. Remember, we are one person trying to serve 30 plus for some of you at one time. So you're just going to do your best. So I think varying the labs that you do throughout a semester, that's the best way you can kind of, some labs will hit some levels better and some will hit others levels better. And that's kind of the best we can do there. Now, a specific question I get a lot is like with my lab groups, do I intentionally create those lab groups to mix the levels, to put like some high achievers with some average ones with some lower, or do I put all the high achievers together so that they can go off on their own and then I put all the lowest ones together so I can really focus on them? How do I do that? And I could see arguments for all of this. So there's no right or wrong here. My personal opinion, since someone asked, I am an always and forever random lab group person. I'm so passionate about this. I talked about my popsicle sticks before. At the beginning of the year, I put every student's name on a popsicle stick. I keep them in a beaker or a plastic bag at the front of the room. I go through the popsicle sticks twice in every class period to make sure everyone gets called on at least twice. And I use these for every partnership, every lab group, all of that. I do it live. I draw the sticks live. I do it completely random. And I do it every single time this way because I think there's such a benefit to learning how to work together with people that are like you in ability and who are not like you in ability. And so we always called it the fate of the bag because I typically had mine in plastic bags. I love that the fate of the bag determines what we're going to get this lab. Are we going to get some groups that is like a higher achieving group? Oh, okay, they might get through it faster. Great. Well, when they finish, I'm going to send them to work with this group and help them. Or, all the groups kind of worked out that they're a little bit more mixed level. That's great. The higher achievers can kind of lead the group and help the people along that are in their group. I'm just like always and forever random. I love the pressure it takes off of me because kids are always complaining they don't want to work with so-and-so or whatever. Like I love my students. I have relationships with them. Honestly, I'm too involved typically in their social dynamics. The girls tend to tell me all of the scoop on who's dating who and what's happened. And I can't navigate that territory every time we're doing a lab to make sure you're not with this ex-boyfriend or the person you just had that. Like I can't do that. And so the fate of the bag takes the pressure off of me. And again, it gives them practice working with people they like, people they don't like, whatever. If you get stuck with the same person 3 labs in a row, well, fate of the bag. The universe wanted you guys to learn how to work together. So you're going to figure it out. So that's kind of my opinion on that. Now, who needs more support in labs. And so that's where on lab days, my differentiation is really more on the fly on lab days. It's not the actual lab that's changing as much as it is like, I know who needs to be checked in with more and who needs more of that support. Okay. Now let's talk projects. Any project I do, I like to do it completely in class. That's a huge thing I've changed as I've grown and matured in my career and just learned more about being a more equitable practitioner, if you will. But I just think we cannot be expecting students to do work outside of our class when we have no idea the burdens they have on their families, the work they may have to be doing to provide for themselves or their families, like their siblings they might be caring for. I mean, so many things. There's the pressure their own parents might be putting on them to play 3 sports. Like it's a lot. So any projects I do, I build in class time for them. That way I can always be monitoring and I can very easily, again, provide more support to some than others while they're working on these projects. To differentiate, I love to give students choice for their output. Hey, here's the rubric. Here's kind of my expectations. You can work within these parameters as long as you hit this rubric. Also, like if you don't like the project and you have a different idea for how to show me that you have learned to know XYZ, whatever this project is about, present that to me. I love it. I literally had a teacher DM me a couple weeks ago and I laughed out loud. She uses my chemistry curriculum. And in Unit 4, chemical bonds, when students learn about metallic bonds, there's like this little creative activity, this alloy activity. And basically students get assigned an alloy in a group and they have to research it and make like an ad for it. It's literally just like a one-dayer to give them some practical, memorable connection to like metals at all. Okay. It's simple. It's fun. Again, I like to have like creative breaks too in my instructional resources. Like some of your life science students are literally, their souls are dying while they sit in your physical science classes or chemistry classes. And so I like to give them like a coloring break or a creative break every once in a while. So this is one of those. But this teacher DMs me and she was like, so hilarious. One of my groups was like, I hate this project. And they got pewter for their alloy. And they were like, I don't want to do this. They're like, can we do something else? And she was like, go for it. She gave them that freedom to have a different output. And let's be real, y'all. Most of the students that are going to be saying stuff like this, tend to be higher achievers that are going to come up with these ideas for other outputs. Y'all, they made the most hilarious video. They gave her permission to send it to me so I could see. I was dying. It was like the pewter hate club group. And it was basically all the reasons why like pewter is a stupid alloy and like, why do we even use it? Like there's so many other things that are so much better than it. And I was dying laughing, but they hit the points on the rubric and that's all that matters. But she gave them the space to differentiate for themselves and come up with their own output. And I just thought that was such stellar teaching that she did. And so I want to encourage you to do the same with projects. And that's one thing I love about projects. Also, in terms of supporting your higher need students with a project, typically the hardest part is just the execution. It's not that the actual project is too hard. It's the overwhelm of how big it is. And so that's where I've talked about in previous episodes, like I'm handing those students like a research outline or, hey, you want to keep it low key? I'm going to email you some websites. You use these websites while you're doing your research. Or you want to give me an outline of your children's book project? Let me read through your words before you start actually coloring and assembling your children's book. And I'll make sure your words are all accurate. You know, those are little things we're offering on the side to kind of support those students. I love the flexibility that projects like that bring. Typically, too, hopefully your higher achievers, they're just going to take these and run with them and they're not going to need your support. And that frees you up to help these other students. Okay, that is the majority of the instructional resources that I'm using. Now, we need to talk about tests. If your students are in the same class period and they're getting the same credit for the same class, like you have general bio, they're all getting general bio credit. I don't feel like you can give them different tests. That to me just does not seem fair at all. But one thing you can do is for those students that are fast finishers, have them do something to support you. Maybe it's sending them to the copy room to make the copies of your packets for the next unit that you're going to give out the next day when you start your new unit. Maybe it's something like, hey, you get to work on an extra credit project where you're going to make word walls for our next unit. Here's all the vocab terms for our next unit. I need you to do 5 of them for a word wall we're going to use to decorate our classroom. Because I'm all about when it comes to tests, like we're going to give the most time for the masses here to do the test. If you finish early, these are some options that you can do. Now, for tests, if students are in the same class period, but they're getting different leveled credit, you're going to give them different tests. I typically use the same multiple choice questions on my CP and honors tests just because, y'all, multiple choice questions are so hard to write good ones. It is so hard to do it. And so that takes the majority of my time when I'm running tests is getting the good multiple choice that are really fair and really testing what I want them to test. And then I differentiate the open response. I'm going to do deeper, higher order thinking questions for my honors and less support in those questions. So for example, CP, the question for both might be something about comparing and contrasting prokaryotes to eukaryotes, but CP's answer sheet is going to have a chart on it and it's going to have numbers like fill in 3 differences and 2 similarities, whereas honors is just going to be open-ended compare and contrast, 6 points, and they need to write that out as best they see fit. Another thing would be like for stoichiometry or any sort of math-based problem. For a CP test, they may have the same exact question on CP versus honors in the open response, but CP might have an A, B, C, D, E. And I'm going to break it down for them. Like, okay, A, let's write the equation. B, let's balance it. C, let's triple check we balanced it right before we dive in because that's going to ruin the whole problem. Okay, D, now you're going to now solve for this. Now E, solve for that. I'm going to walk them through the steps. Whereas with honors, I might just give them the written question and say, you need to find how much of this would it make? And they have to know, oh, that means I have to find the limiting reactant. I have to do all these things. I'm not going to break down the steps. That's a really easy way to scaffold it. If you don't want students to know that they're getting these different tests, use different forms. I already do A and B tests, rearrange multiple choice. You could have A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do shapes in the corner. Those are really easy to kind of change up so that they don't necessarily know that they're getting something different. You can also use these shapes too if you're differentiating activities and you're taking the time to really make leveled activities. Like I said, I don't really level my activities very much. I just try to provide more scaffolded support during the activities because that to me is a lot easier. Okay, wow, this is getting so long, but I want to say one last thing. For those of you who have multi-levels in the same class and they're getting different credit, I definitely think those students that are getting honors credit but are in this mixed level class, let's be real, you're going to be speaking more to the lower level students in your class period. So they do need to do something extra to get that extra oomph to earn that honors credit. And so I recommend doing what happened to me when I was in the honors college at Clemson. There were several honors courses I took that I just was in the regular lecture. Like when I took plant biology, I was in the regular plant biology lecture and lab. But then I had an extra research project I did outside of it where I had to meet with my professor and do some different things throughout the semester in order to get counted as honors credit for that course. I recommend doing that the same. I think it's a great way to kind of fill that honors need. I have these long-term independent research projects. They're kind of like PBL inspired. They're in every bundle that I have, like a curriculum bundle. So if you have like the full year anatomy bundle, you have this PBL pack, but they're also available a la carte. That's a great thing to grab and use. And it's totally laid out for you to organize. Like, here's how often you're going to check in with them. They'll use this Google form to check in, that kind of thing. So that then you only have to grade the whole cumulative project kind of at the end. But I really recommend that if you're trying to figure out how to make sure those 8th graders that are getting a high school credit for this physical science course versus the 8th graders in your class that aren't getting the high school credit, like they're having to do something more to really earn that. I highly recommend that. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I'm so sorry I got so long-winded here. I just really hope you saw value in this. Let me know if you did. I love hearing from you all, especially DM me on Instagram at It's Not Rocket Science with little dots between each word. I'm trying a lot harder this year to really show up on Instagram and just be a more whole person there. So I would love to just chat with you there. I love chatting over there. But my take-home challenge for you, because I know this was so much, is if you need one starting place, let's just start with relationships. All of this differentiation stuff is so nuanced and it's so individualized. Like, hello, that's literally what differentiation is. And that's why it's so hard. But the best place we can start is by having one-on-one conversations this week. Identify your outliers, above or below the mean here. Reach out to them, have those conversations, get them on board with serving your class or doing the extra thing or not being ashamed to be told you only have to do half the things. Like, have those one-on-one conversations. I think that is the simplest place you can get started with this. And I mentioned so many supplemental episodes and blogs and things like that. So I'm going to link all of that in the show notes like I always do at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 171. If you haven't left a review yet for the podcast, I would love if you left a 5-star rating and review, and especially do it if you have mixed level classes and you're excited to implement some of these suggestions. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.